Welcome to the Haunting Hour. Tonight, you'll hear a collection of true scary stories for sleep that came from people around the world that are perfect for a dark, rainy night. These stories are unsettling, mysterious, and all claim to be true. Whether you're here to sleep or stay up with the lights on, settle in, relax, and listen closely. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know which story you enjoyed the most. I used to work the night shift at a printing warehouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, just rows of humming machines, the scent of ink, and the low murmur of late-night radio echoing off the concrete. Most nights blurred together, but there was one that never left me. That night, my ride bailed last minute. I wasn't mad. He had a kid. Things happen. But it meant I had to walk to the next neighborhood over to catch the last bus. I clocked out around 1:50, pulled my hoodie tight against the cold, and started the half-mile walk to the stop on Glenside Road. It was quiet out. Too quiet, honestly. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. By the time I reached the bus stand, it was well past 2 o'clock. The little digital board flickered with static and red letters. One bus left to run. I asked the attendant inside the booth, an older guy in a windbreaker, about the last one to Kingston Avenue. He didn't even look at me when he said it was long gone, probably around 2 o'clock. Said next one wasn't until 6. I didn't have it in me to wait 4 hours under a buzzing light with no one around. So I pulled out my phone, tapped into my GPS, and started looking for routes. Most of the suggested paths followed the main roads, but one stood out. It was short, cut right through the industrial district, looped around a park, then joined up with a residential back road just a few blocks from my place. It said 20 minutes. I figured I could walk it in 15 if I kept a good pace. The first 10 minutes were fine. I passed a boarded-up car wash, a row of storage units, and one of those prefabricated buildings with tinted windows and no signs. All the businesses back there had long since shut down or moved. It wasn't dangerous per se, just lifeless. No cars, no lights in any windows, just empty lots and brittle weeds pushing through cracks in the sidewalk. As I rounded the corner by an abandoned logistics center, I noticed the alley my GPS was guiding me into. It ran between two old office buildings, both of them probably closed for years. The one on the left had shattered windows on the top floor, while the one on the right looked like it had been gutted. Still, I figured it was just a shortcut. Urban decay doesn't equal danger, not on its own. I took a few steps into the alley, and that's when I felt it. Like someone had just stopped talking behind me, even though I knew no one had been there. My skin went cold. I paused, checked behind me, then above. That's when I saw it. Not a shadow, not a person, just movement. On the third-floor balcony of the building to my left, there was a shape. It stepped backward and disappeared inside, but I know I saw it. Tall, stiff posture, no flashlight, no phone light, just standing there in complete darkness, watching. I told myself it was probably a squatter or someone else using this shortcut to cut through. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be seen. Not by whoever that was. Still, curiosity has always been a flaw of mine. I crossed the alley and stepped through a half-open door into the building. Inside, the air smelled like dust and dry rot. My shoes crunched over broken glass and loose gravel from the crumbling ceiling. I kept my phone flashlight low, just enough to light the path. Most of the cubicles were stripped bare, office chairs with no wheels, filing cabinets emptied and rusting. A broken clock on the wall was stuck at 9 o'clock. I was about to turn back when I heard something. Not footsteps. Not talking. It sounded like breathing, heavy, slow, like someone trying not to be noticed. But too close to hide it completely. I followed it. Not because I wanted to. My legs were shaking by then, but because it was between me and the door. I moved through the maze of desks, trying to be as quiet as possible. That's when I saw him. There was a man sitting on the floor, back against the wall. He wore a gray security uniform with no visible logo. His face was turned toward the corner, like he was trying to look through it. At first, I thought he was asleep, but his lips were moving, muttering something. Not to me, not to anyone, just into the drywall. I whispered, asked if he was okay. No response. I said it louder, still nothing, just mumbling. So I stepped closer. That's when he turned his head slowly and stared at me. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. He didn't blink. His mouth kept moving, but no sound came out now. I was about to reach for my phone when he suddenly scrambled to his feet and bolted down the hall like something was chasing him. I didn't follow. I just stood there. My whole body tense, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my gums. I wanted to leave right then. But when I turned back toward the door, I heard another noise. Something from the upper floor, a low thump, followed by what I thought was whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't just one voice. It sounded like a group of people, close together, all speaking at once. Against all better judgment, I started up the stairs. I wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe part of me thought the guard had gone up there, maybe he needed help. I don't know, but something in me said I had to see it, maybe to prove I hadn't imagined it. Each step felt like it echoed for miles. By the time I reached the 5th floor, I was shaking. My phone battery was down to 10%. The hallway was lit only by moonlight leaking through the cracks in the boarded windows. Halfway down the corridor, one door stood open. A deep red glow spilled out across the floor. My pulse spiked so high I felt dizzy. I inched closer, slow and careful, until I could just barely see inside. There were 4 people, maybe 5. They stood in a rough circle, backs to me. One of them held something in his hands, a bucket or a basin, I couldn't tell. The others were chanting, not loud but in a rhythm, all at the same pitch, all without breaking pace. In the middle of them, on the floor, lay the man in the security uniform. He wasn't moving. I saw his chest, no rise, no fall. There was something smeared across his shirt, something that reflected the red light like it was wet. One of the people leaned down, dipped something into the basin, and lifted it to their face. That's when I saw it was a glass. They drank whatever was inside, then passed it to the next person. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were welded to the floor. My throat dried out so fast it hurt to breathe. Then I shifted my weight and the floorboard creaked. They stopped. Every single one of them turned toward the door. No words, just those blank stares, the same glassy look I'd seen on the guard. I backed away, slow, quiet, but one of them stepped forward. Then another. Then they all began moving, calmly, like they knew I had nowhere to go. I turned and ran. I didn't stop to look behind me. I just ran. Down the hallway, back toward the stairs. I hit the landing, turned too fast, and slammed into the handrail hard enough to bruise my ribs. Still, I kept going. My phone slipped from my hand somewhere around the 3rd floor. I didn't care. I needed to get out. The building shifted as I moved, not literally, but in that way old places do when your adrenaline's peaking. Doors that had been closed were now open. The air had changed too. It felt thicker, damper, like the humidity had spiked. I could hear them behind me now. Their steps were calm, measured. They weren't chasing me in a panic. They were just following, as if they didn't think I'd make it far. By the time I reached the ground floor, my shirt was soaked through. My legs burned. I could barely breathe. But the door was still cracked open, just like before. I didn't hesitate. I pushed through it and burst back into the alley. The air outside hit me like a slap. Cold, sharp, real. I staggered forward and didn't stop until I reached the next street over, where I collapsed against a rusted fence near the loading docks. I looked back, expecting to see someone coming through that alley, but it stayed empty. The building loomed in the dark like a tumor, silent, lifeless. But I knew what I'd seen. It took me a few minutes to gather myself. Then I pulled out my backup phone, the one I used for music, and called the local precinct. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I just told them someone was dead. I gave the address, told them everything I could in 30 seconds before I started crying. They didn't come right away. It was nearly 4 o'clock before a cruiser pulled up. The officers took my statement while shining their flashlights into the building. Then 2 of them went inside. They came out 20 minutes later. Nothing, they said. No blood, no body, no broken glass or recent footprints. The place had been empty for years. They chalked it up to stress and exhaustion. One of them offered to give me a ride home, which I took, mostly because I didn't trust my legs to hold me upright anymore. I didn't sleep that morning. Couldn't. I lay on the couch with the TV on low, trying to convince myself that maybe I had hallucinated part of it. Maybe I'd filled in gaps my brain didn't understand. But I couldn't explain the man in the uniform, or the chanting, or the taste of blood that lingered in my mouth like it had been carried on the air. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed home, called in sick, turned off my phone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces turning toward me. Not surprised, not angry, just focused, unblinking. I finally forced myself to go outside again after the 3rd week. I went back to the precinct first, asked about any reports filed that night. They had nothing. No incident log, no death, no missing persons. When I asked about the building, they said it had been condemned years ago, but that the records were spotty. Fires, squatters, no security guard listed as employed there in over a decade. I started digging on my own. I checked satellite images, public directories, anything I could find. The building didn't appear on most recent maps. The alley I'd taken that night wasn't listed as a registered route. It was like it had been edited out. I went back once, during the day. I thought maybe in the sunlight I could rationalize it, that maybe the fear had warped my memory. But when I got there, the lot was different. The building I had entered, gone, not knocked down, not boarded up, just a leveled slab of concrete surrounded by a rusted fence. No debris, no tape, like it had never existed at all. I stood there for half an hour, trying to line up the angles. I was sure of where I had gone in, sure of the path I had taken, but now there was nothing to show for it. I thought maybe I had misremembered. Maybe I had gone into the wrong structure. Until I looked down. Buried near the fence line, wedged between 2 slabs of broken sidewalk, was a piece of fabric. Gray. Stiff with age. I pulled it loose, a torn patch from a uniform sleeve. Security lettering faded, but still visible. Same color, same style. I kept it. I wish I hadn't. From that point on, things changed. I don't mean in a haunting way. No objects moving, no nightmares. But people started avoiding me. Friends stopped responding to texts. Co-workers ignored my return. When I tried to explain what happened, they looked at me like I was sick, like I was unstable. Eventually, I stopped talking about it. I thought maybe I could leave it behind, pretend it was just a night that got away from me. But there's one part I haven't told anyone, not until now. A few months later, I woke up just before dawn. There was a knock at my door. Not frantic, not repeated, just once. A single knock, soft enough that I thought I had imagined it. I got up, looked through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door slowly, cautiously. The hallway was empty, but on the floor in front of my door was a glass. Half full, same shape, same size, same red tint. There was no note, no sound, nothing else left behind. I moved apartments the next day. I never told my landlord why. Even now, years later, I won't walk that stretch of the city after dark. I changed jobs, changed numbers. I don't keep anything in my home with reflective surfaces after sundown. I know that sounds paranoid. I know how it looks from the outside. But I saw something that night. I saw people doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, and I wasn't supposed to witness it. I don't know if it was a cult. I don't know if it was something worse, but I know this. They didn't try to kill me that night. They let me go. And I think it's because they knew I wouldn't be believed. Not then, maybe not ever, but I also think they let me go because at some point in the future, they want me to come back. I used to watch a little boy named Caleb every Thursday evening. His mother, Rebecca, was a nurse who worked evening shifts at the urgent care clinic in town. She lived 2 floors above me in our old apartment building, and we first got to know each other in the laundry room. Over time, she started asking for small favors, grabbing a package from her doorstep, letting her know if her car lights were on, until eventually, she asked if I'd be willing to watch Caleb for a few hours once a week. At first, I said no. I didn't have much experience with kids, and something about taking care of someone else's child made me nervous. But after a few weeks of polite insistence, I caved. Caleb was 6 years old, polite, soft-spoken, and unnervingly neat for his age. He never made a mess, never ran or shouted. He had a routine I quickly learned. Half an hour of tablet time, a microwave dinner, a quiet bath, and then exactly 15 minutes of television before bed. I mostly sat on the couch, texting or flipping through shows while he went through his motions. Sometimes he'd ask me questions about my job or the books on my shelf, but he never asked anything strange. Not at first. One night in early fall, after I'd tucked him in and turned off his light, I heard his voice behind me as I was pulling the blanket over his chest. "Before you go, can you check the hallway?" I turned back. "What for?" His eyes didn't blink. "Just to make sure he's not standing out there." I almost laughed. "Who?" He pulled the blanket up to his nose and whispered, "The tall man who knocks too low." I paused, unsure how to respond. That sounds like something from a movie. He didn't say anything, just closed his eyes and turned over. I left his door cracked and stood in the kitchen for a while, thinking about what he'd said. It felt like something he might have overheard at school or invented from a dream. I opened the front door and glanced at the hallway. Nothing was there. The next Thursday, Caleb brought it up again. I was brushing crumbs off the coffee table when he came into the living room in his pajamas. "You forgot to check," he said. I looked up. "Check what?" He didn't move. The hallway. This time I humored him. I walked to the door, twisted the lock open, and looked through the peephole. Our floor was quiet, the yellow light above buzzing faintly. The old man in apartment 26 had hung another Halloween wreath even though it was only late September. I turned back to Caleb. Nothing there. He didn't look relieved, just nodded and went back to bed. A week later, it escalated. I arrived around 6:15. Rebecca was already dressed in her scrubs, purse slung over her shoulder. She looked tired and distracted, but grateful as always. She told me Caleb had been unusually quiet that afternoon, hadn't eaten much, and kept watching the door. I offered to try and coax him to eat, and she thanked me before heading down the stairwell. Caleb sat on the carpet in front of the television, his arms wrapped around his knees. He didn't say hello when I came in. I offered him chicken nuggets and apple slices, but he just shook his head. "They always knock on Thursday," he mumbled. I lowered myself onto the couch. "Who does?" he shrugged. "The man and the girl." I tried not to react. "What girl?" He looked down at the carpet. "The one that lives in the walls." That phrase sat with me for a long time. I tried brushing it off, but his tone was too neutral, not playful, not scared, just factual. Around 8 o'clock, I tucked him in again, same routine. Pajamas, toothbrush, short show. But before I could leave his room, he sat up. "You have to check tonight. They're early." I paused in the doorway. "How do you know?" He looked at me. "Because they already knocked once, while you were microwaving." I hadn't heard anything, not even a soft thud, but the microwave in Rebecca's kitchen was loud. I told him I'd look and walked into the hallway, this time more uneasy than before. I stood in front of the door and watched through the peephole for nearly a minute. Still nothing. Just before I turned away, I thought I saw movement. A flicker in the far corner near the stairwell, but it was fast, and the lens distorted everything outside the center. I told myself it was nothing. When I turned back, Caleb was standing in the hallway behind me. "I told you," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "Caleb, it's fine," I said firmly. "No one's there. It's late, go to bed." He didn't argue, just turned and walked back to his room without another word. That night, I stayed in the living room instead of going through my usual routine. I kept the television off and just listened. The hallway outside was quiet, and the building always creaked in predictable ways. The elevator cables, the radiator, the groan of pipes. But around 9:30, I heard something that made my stomach tighten. A knock. Not loud, not hard, but low. Much lower than the height of the peephole. It came from the bottom of the door. 3 soft taps, barely above the threshold. I sat frozen on the couch. Every part of me waited for a follow-up knock. Something louder or more assertive, but nothing came. Just the hum of the hallway light outside and the tick of the kitchen clock. I got up slowly and approached the door, pressing one ear to the cool wood. Nothing. I checked the peephole again. The hallway was empty. But when I looked down, I saw something odd. A smudge, just above the baseboard, like a streak made by a hand pressed low against the door, oily and distinct, with a trail that curved upward, then stopped. I didn't open the door. I waited another hour, kept the lights on, and checked on Caleb every 15 minutes. He was asleep each time, arms tucked under his chin, chest rising slowly. The following week, I almost canceled. But Rebecca texted me that morning saying she was short-staffed and didn't have anyone else. I agreed, but something about the arrangement no longer felt casual. It felt like I was stepping into something that wasn't mine to manage. That evening, when I walked into the apartment, Caleb was sitting at the table with his hands in his lap. His plate of spaghetti hadn't been touched. "They said you saw them," he said. I stopped in the doorway. "What?" He looked up. "They're mad now. You weren't supposed to see." "Caleb, who told you that?" His voice dropped. "She did." I felt like the room got colder. The air was still, heavy. My ears were ringing slightly, like I'd just come out of a loud room into silence. I reached for my phone and texted Rebecca. "Hey, Caleb's saying weird things again. Has he been watching anything new lately?" She didn't respond. I kept him in the living room with me until bedtime. I told him we'd play a quiet game and brought out a deck of cards. He humored me for 10 minutes, then stood and walked to the door. "She's behind it right now," he whispered. I followed him. "Caleb, no one's out there. She wants to know why you don't knock back." I reached for the doorknob, then stopped. My hand hovered above it. "Don't open it," he said. "Just listen." I leaned in. Nothing. Silence. I straightened up, and we both stood there. I was about to suggest he head to bed when there was a sound. Not a knock this time. A scrape, slow and deliberate, something dragging across the other side of the door from bottom to top. I could feel it vibrate through the floor. Caleb didn't flinch. He stepped back and looked up at me. "She only does that when you're listening." My chest felt tight. I led him away from the door and locked both the knob and the deadbolt. I shut every interior door and turned on the hallway light. Then I sat in the kitchen and waited. This time, I didn't check through the peephole. I waited for Rebecca to come home. When she finally arrived just before midnight, I asked if she'd noticed anything strange. Her face changed almost immediately. She set down her bag, walked to the fridge, and poured herself a glass of water before answering. "Caleb's dad had a sister," she said. "She lived with us for a while after he passed. She was not well." I waited. She told Caleb things, stories, weird ones. I found her whispering to him at night once. She moved out shortly after. I haven't seen her in over a year. She didn't say anything else. I left without pressing her. But I didn't sleep well that night. And I didn't babysit the week after. A few weeks passed before I heard from Rebecca again. She left a voicemail while I was at work, her voice quieter than usual, almost uncertain. She asked if I'd be willing to come by just for an hour or two. Not even to babysit. She said she just needed to run to the pharmacy, and Caleb was nervous when left alone. I told myself it wouldn't hurt to help out, that I'd keep the visit short and stay near the door. When I got to the apartment, Rebecca looked thinner. She had a fading bruise on her left forearm and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, even though she didn't smoke. She didn't invite me in right away, just leaned against the door frame and stared down the hallway behind me before stepping aside to let me in. Caleb was sitting cross-legged in the corner of the living room with a sheet draped over a lamp. The entire room was dim, and he was mumbling softly to himself. When I said hello, he didn't look up. Rebecca muttered that he'd been doing that all day. She pointed to the cabinet above the microwave and said there were snacks if I got hungry. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt final. I stood near the coat rack for a while, watching Caleb's outline in the soft glow under the sheet. The rest of the apartment was unusually quiet. I could hear the fridge ticking in the kitchen, the hum of the heating pipe above the radiator. But no television, no toys out, no signs of movement. I finally walked over and crouched beside him. His hands were folded in his lap, palms open like he was holding something invisible. "She says you're scared now," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Who?" He finally looked at me. His pupils were wide, almost black. "The girl with no elbows." That phrase sent a strange chill through me. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Caleb, where did you learn that?" He blinked slowly. "She told me she used to knock on your door before I was born." The apartment suddenly felt smaller, like the air was getting squeezed through invisible walls. I stood up and took a few steps back. Caleb pulled the sheet down from the lamp, flooding the room with yellow light. For the next 20 minutes, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone and glancing at the door every few seconds. I kept imagining the sound from that night, that low scrape from bottom to top. I kept seeing the oily smudge that had faded but never completely disappeared. At one point, I asked Caleb if he wanted to watch something, but he shook his head and stared at the ceiling. "She's up there now," he said, "behind the light." I looked up. The ceiling bulb flickered once, then steadied. I told myself it was nothing, just old wiring. The building was nearly 60 years old. Things creaked. Things buzzed. It was normal. But just before Rebecca returned, something else happened. There was a knock, but it wasn't on the door. It came from inside the hallway closet. 3 soft knocks, same height as before, low, near the base. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard it. Caleb was still in the living room. The sound made me stop mid-step. I turned toward the closet slowly. The handle didn't move. The door didn't bulge or shake. But the sound had been real. I crossed the floor and pressed my palm against the wood. It was warm, warmer than the rest of the apartment. I didn't open it. Rebecca came back 10 minutes later, bags in hand, and I left quickly, saying I had somewhere to be. I didn't. That night, back in my own apartment, I stared at the inside of my closet door for nearly an hour before I went to bed. Something had shifted in me. I couldn't explain it, but I knew the fear wasn't just about Caleb anymore. The next Thursday, I left a note on Rebecca's door saying I wouldn't be available for the rest of the month. I thought about explaining why, but I couldn't put it into words without sounding unstable. I tried to go back to normal, reading, cooking, avoiding that hallway on our floor after dark, but I still found myself pausing at the sound of every knock, every low thud that echoed from the pipes or stairwell. 3 weeks later, the hallway in our building was closed off with police tape. 2 officers were outside apartment 26. I heard someone say the old man who lived there hadn't been seen in days. When they went inside, they found his door bolted shut from the inside and claw marks on the back of it. The strange part, or at least what I could hear from my cracked door, was that there were scratch marks on the ceiling of the closet inside his unit. Deep ones, no animals in the apartment. No signs of forced entry. That night, I left my hallway light on. Every time I passed the peephole, I found myself pressing 2 fingers gently against it, just to make sure it was solid, just to feel that nothing could reach through. A few days later, Rebecca showed up at my door. She looked hollowed out. Her skin was pale and her lips were cracked. She asked if she could come in. I let her. She didn't sit down, just stood in the center of my living room, swaying slightly like she hadn't slept. "I think it's getting worse," she said. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Caleb stopped sleeping altogether. He talks to corners now, doesn't eat, keeps telling me we have to move. I asked if she had considered it, I mean. She shook her head. "Every time I try to pack, things disappear. I lose hours. I'll find his clothes folded in the hallway or the bathtub filled with ice cubes. My phone alarm goes off when I haven't set it. Last night, I woke up to find the peephole completely covered in black tape from the outside." I didn't want to hear anymore, but she kept going. "Caleb told me the knocking isn't coming from the hallway anymore. He says it's coming up through the floor, that she's trying a different way in." I felt dizzy, like I was leaning over a high railing and the world was tilting backward. Rebecca finally looked at me. "I know it sounds insane, but I think she's attached to the building. Not just him, not just me. She's in the structure, the walls, the pipes." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. That night, I moved my couch away from the wall. I unplugged everything. I left the bathroom light on. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. A sort of slow knock, but not on wood. It was softer, more distant, like someone tapping the underside of a mattress. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and after that, I started looking for other places to live. 2 months later, I found a studio across town in a newer building with sealed windows and a digital lock. I didn't tell Rebecca. I left her a note, but she never replied. Part of me wonders if she ever read it. It's been a year now. I haven't seen Caleb since, but every once in a while I still wake up at exactly 3:20 a.m. No alarm, no noise, just an immediate awareness, like something touched my shoulder without actually making contact. Last week, I found a smudge on the inside of my door, low, just above the baseboard. I scrubbed it off, but it came back 2 days later, same spot. I called the building maintenance. They checked the outside security camera, said no one had been in the hallway, that my door hadn't been touched. I asked if they'd ever had issues with strange noises or complaints from other tenants. The guy just laughed and said the only weird thing was how often the peepholes in newer units got tampered with. One resident even claimed someone had pushed a coin through theirs. Bent the inside lens. He shrugged. Probably just bored kids. I nodded, thanked him, and went back inside. But I haven't looked through my peepholes since. Now, whenever I approach my front door, I stop 2 steps away. I press my fingers against the metal. Feel for warmth. Feel for something that shouldn't be there. Because I've learned that sometimes silence isn't peace. It's waiting. And if you press your ear against the door long enough, you can still hear her, dragging her nails through the walls, finding her way back in. It was the only public high school in our area with an attached technology lab. So the building was a strange mix of modern additions and older foundations. Most students didn't even realize how much of the school was built below ground. The stairwells went deeper than they should have. The teachers never talked about it. You had to take a specific hallway near the back of the admin wing just to reach the lowest level, and most of us assumed it was just more storage or pipes. That changed in October of senior year, when I started helping Mr. Dorman after school with AV Club setup. He let me use a little badge to access some of the locked rooms where they stored equipment, and once I had that key card, I started noticing how often it worked on doors that weren't labeled. There was a steel access door past the auto shop with a card reader just like the AV rooms. I had passed it dozens of times, but one afternoon I tapped my badge out of boredom. The light turned green. No click, no motorized unlock sound, just green. The door was heavier than it looked. I had to push it with my shoulder, and when it opened, I expected to see more stacked monitors or broken desks. But instead, there was a tiled stairwell going down. one level deeper than I knew existed. The air was cooler, still almost damp. I didn't go in that day. I told myself it wasn't worth getting in trouble for. But I also didn't mention it to anyone, not even the friends I normally would have bragged to about a discovery like that. About a week later, I went back. It was just after 4:15 in the afternoon. The halls were mostly empty, the janitors hadn't started yet, and I had an excuse: AV storage duty. I used the badge again, still green, still unlocked. This time I went down. The first landing was about a half flight below the basement boiler level. The walls were lined with ceramic white tiles, some of them cracked. There was no signage, no pipes or warning labels. At the bottom was a concrete hallway with two heavy steel doors, one on each side. The one on the left had a narrow window slit, and I had to tilt my head just to see anything through the thick, reinforced glass. Inside was a narrow room, barely wide enough for a folding chair. There was nothing in it, no lights were on, but the glow from the hallway made it visible enough to see the tiled floor and a small black intercom panel near the back wall. I turned to the right-hand door, no window this time. I tapped the handle lightly, but it didn't budge. There was a keypad, no badge reader. I backed away, not wanting to leave fingerprints on it. Behind me, I heard a soft whirring. It wasn't loud, almost like a projector fan starting up. I turned quickly. Nothing had changed in the hallway. I stood there for another minute or two, just listening. It's strange how loud your own heartbeat feels when you're in a place where no one else is supposed to be. I kept expecting someone to appear, some maintenance guy maybe, but the silence never broke. Eventually, I climbed back up. Nothing happened. No alarms, no security. Just a steel door that closed behind me like it was never open. I should have left it alone. I know that now. The second time I went, I brought Alex. He wasn't supposed to know, but I let it slip during lunch after a chemistry test. At first, he thought I was exaggerating, but he skipped cross-country practice that day and we headed back together around 4:10. Everything was the same. Badge lit up green, door creaked open, stairwell smelled like stale bleach and dust. When we got to the bottom though, something had changed. The window on the left-hand door was covered. It looked like it had been painted over from the inside with black primer. You could still see the outline of the intercom, but the rest was just dark. Alex didn't seem fazed. He went straight to the right-hand door and tried the handle again. It was still locked, but this time the keypad lit up. It was dim, like a dying battery, but it blinked to life the moment he touched it. Then the hallway lights dimmed slightly. Not all the way, just enough to notice. I took a step back. My hand brushed the wall behind me, and I felt something click. A small mechanical switch maybe, but nothing happened. I told Alex we should leave. He said he wanted to try one more thing. He crouched near the base of the keypad and pulled a coin from his pocket, trying to wedge it into the side panel. He thought maybe it would reveal a model number or serial plate. Then something inside the room knocked. It wasn't loud and it didn't repeat. Just a single flat knock from the other side of the steel door. Alex froze. I didn't move either. He whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, then stepped closer to the door. We both listened. Nothing. He stood up slowly, and I could hear his breathing, shallow and fast. Then the light above us flickered again, and the keypad went dark. Neither of us spoke after that. We just left. I didn't run, but I walked fast enough to feel it in my legs. When we got back to the main level, Alex didn't even say goodbye. He just peeled off toward the parking lot. I waited outside for my mom and tried to act normal, but every car door that slammed made me jump. I felt wired, like I had caffeine buzzing through my bloodstream, but my stomach was cold and tight. The next day, Alex didn't come to school. He wasn't sick. I texted him, but he didn't answer. He ignored my DMs too. That wasn't like him. On day 3, he finally replied. He said he wasn't feeling great. When I asked if it was about the room, he didn't respond. That night, I dreamt about the hallway. I was standing in front of the door with the blacked out window, and I could hear someone breathing behind it. I couldn't see their face. I couldn't see anything, but I knew if I opened that door, they'd be standing there. When I woke up, my throat hurt like I'd been screaming, and my sheets were soaked with sweat. I didn't go back the rest of that week. I thought if I left it alone, it would go away, but the badge still worked. Every day I passed that hallway. Every day I felt a pull, like a loose thread I couldn't stop tugging. Then the intercom turned on. It was a Friday, just after the last bell. I was putting away camera gear when I heard a faint buzz echo through the stairwell. I followed it, and as I reached the steel door, I realized it was coming from inside the room with the painted window. A low hum, then a voice, faint, garbled, just static at first, then something more. It said my name, only once, just my first name, but clear. The intercom cut off a second later, and the keypad on the opposite door flashed once, then went dark. I backed away. I didn't even touch the door this time. I just left. That weekend, I got a call from Alex's older sister. She said he hadn't been sleeping, that he kept the lights on at night, that he'd told her something had followed him home. She didn't say it like a joke. She wasn't laughing. I asked if he'd gone back. She said he wouldn't talk about it. By the time Monday came around, I felt like I hadn't really rested in days. Everything at school seemed too bright, too loud. My teachers' voices didn't register. I kept scanning the stairwell windows for movement, but nothing came. Then Mr. Dorman asked for his badge back. I didn't even ask why, I just handed it over. He didn't say anything else, just nodded and slipped it into his coat pocket. After that, the door near the auto shop got a new reader. One I couldn't access anymore, but I kept watching it. Every week, just to see if anyone went inside. No one ever did. Until one Thursday in November, when I saw the janitor try his badge and step through. He held the door open with his foot for a few seconds as he scanned the frame with a flashlight. And behind him, in the stairwell, I saw someone else. Not a janitor, not a teacher, just a pale face, half hidden in the dark, staring up at me from the landing below. The face was gone by the time I looked back. I had blinked, I think, or maybe I just looked away for a second too long. But when I stepped closer to the door and leaned toward the window, there was nothing. Just the dim, concrete stairwell, stretching into that deeper level I could no longer reach. The janitor didn't see it. He disappeared down the steps with the door closing behind him, and I stood there in the hallway for a long time, waiting for the sound of his return. But it never came. I don't even know how long I waited. I only remember the bell ringing and the hallway filling with students again, like nothing had happened. By the following week, I had convinced myself it had been a reflection, maybe a trick of the light. But something about it stayed with me, especially the eyes. That's the part I couldn't rationalize. The face I'd seen, if it was a face, didn't look surprised. It looked like it had been waiting. Alex came back to school the next day, but he wasn't the same. He had dark rings under his eyes and barely spoke to anyone. He didn't sit at our usual lunch table. He didn't walk with me to chemistry. I asked him if he was okay, and he just nodded, but I could tell he didn't mean it. He avoided eye contact, like something in me scared him. 3 days after that, I found a manila envelope shoved into my locker. No name, just a blank seal with a single strip of black tape across the top. I opened it in the parking lot, away from the other students. Inside were 5 photographs, all printed on glossy paper. The first was a grainy image of the hallway near the steel doors. I could tell because of the cracked tiles and the discoloration on the wall. The second photo showed the keypad, lit up. The third was a close-up of the intercom, dark, but unmistakably the same. The last 2 were different. One was a still shot of me and Alex standing outside the right-hand door. My back was to the camera, and Alex was bent over, working on the panel with his coin. I didn't remember anyone else being there. The angle was from the far end of the hallway, like someone had been watching us through the stairwell entrance. The final photo was blurry. Motion blur, mostly, but the shape in the foreground was clearly a hand. A hand pressed flat against the painted-over window. It was pale, almost gray. The fingers were long and bent slightly, like they'd been clawing at the inside of the door. I didn't show the photos to anyone. I should have. I should have turned them in to the principal, or the school board, or even the police. But something about them felt personal, like a warning. For the next few weeks, I avoided that wing of the school. I didn't even use the bathrooms near the tech lab. I kept my head down, finished my classes, and tried to move on. But even then, I kept seeing things that didn't belong. A door slightly ajar when it had been locked earlier. A light flickering on in an empty stairwell. Once, while walking past the auto shop, I heard a knock. 3 slow taps, echoing faintly from the vents. I told myself it was just the building settling. Old pipes, bad wiring. But deep down, I knew better. In late November, Alex stopped coming to school again. His sister wouldn't answer my texts anymore. She blocked me on every platform. His house still had lights on at night, but no one came or went during the day. It was like they vanished. One morning, I found another envelope in my locker. This time, it had a piece of paper inside. No photos, just a message, typed in all caps on a white sheet. The door was never locked from the outside. I stared at that line for a long time. It didn't make sense, unless it meant someone had locked it from within. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep if I didn't check for myself. The fear of the unknown had started to eat at me more than the fear of what I might find. So I waited until a half day. When most of the students had gone home and the admin offices were empty. I still had a backup badge from AV Club, one I hadn't turned in. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. At 2:15 in the afternoon, I made my way to the door behind the auto shop. Badge light flashed green. Door opened. Stairwell was silent. The air felt warmer this time, as if the ventilation had been turned off. It smelled faintly of mold and stagnant water. I stepped down carefully, testing each tread. At the bottom, everything looked the same. Same white tiles, same scuffed walls. But the door with the painted-over window was gone. In its place was a solid wall, freshly sealed. You could still see the outline where the frame had been, but the gap was filled with gray mortar and mismatched brick. The door with the keypad was still there. I moved closer, and the keypad lit up. I didn't touch it. I just watched as it blinked, once, twice, then shut off again. Behind me, something moved. It was soft, almost like fabric shifting, or bare feet brushing against tile. I turned quickly, but no one was there. The hallway was empty. The stairwell above me was dim, but I could still see the first few steps. Then I heard the intercom. It wasn't the garbled static like before. It was clearer now. A voice I recognized. It was mine. It repeated my own name in a whisper, then paused. Then it said Alex's name. Then the voice laughed, quiet, broken, like a breath catching in a throat. I don't remember running back up the stairs. I only remember hitting the door so hard that my shoulder went numb. I didn't stop until I was in the parking lot. I didn't go back the next day, or the next. Eventually, I told my parents I wanted to transfer. I used grades as an excuse, said I needed a smaller school, a different focus. They agreed. We moved before winter break, and I started over in a town where no one asked about basements or sublevels or old steel doors. For a while, things were okay. But sometimes, I still get envelopes. No return address. Just black tape across the seal. The last one didn't have a message inside. Just a photo of my new house, taken at night. The porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. But in the photo, I was standing at the upstairs window, looking down. Except I wasn't. I had been asleep, and the face in the window wasn't mine. I never wanted to end up here. It wasn't some whimsical dream of rural life or a desperate attempt to unplug from the noise of the city. It was survival, a last-ditch effort to stop the financial bleeding before it swallowed me whole. The house came through a legal letter, thick with stamps and fine print, offering me a place I didn't ask for, in a town I'd never heard of. I was the last living relative willing to claim it, a property buried in the woods of northern Michigan, forgotten even by the people who once called it home. My mother had mentioned the place once when I was a kid. She called it a mistake her aunt never came back from. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. There was always a kind of tension when that side of the family came up, like the air changed for a moment and no one wanted to breathe it in. The drive took most of the day. I left before 6 o'clock and didn't reach the property until after 3. It was tucked off an unmarked gravel road, shielded by rows of pine trees that seemed to bend toward the path like a silent warning. I didn't notice the sound of my tires crunching over stone until I realized there were no other sounds at all. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of power lines. Just the steady grind of rubber and rock as I pulled into a clearing barely wide enough for the car. The house stood at the far end of the clearing, partially buried in tall grass and dense growth that brushed against the siding like it was trying to pull the structure back into the woods. The porch slumped forward slightly, and the windows looked out with a dull, lifeless glare. I remember sitting behind the wheel for a long time, engine idling, hands resting on the steering wheel like I was waiting for a sign that it was safe to get out. Nothing came. Inside was worse than I expected. Dust covered everything in thick layers, turning the air dry and metallic. The furniture was old but intact, and a few cabinets were still stocked with canned food I wouldn't dare open. Most of the drawers were empty. The upstairs bedrooms looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. But it was the downstairs hallway that really stuck with me. There were 4 doors, 2 on each side. The first 3 opened with no resistance. Empty bedrooms, bare walls, broken fixtures. But the last door, the one at the end of the hallway, was different. It was heavier, not just physically, but in the way it sat within the frame, like something behind it was pressing outward. The knob turned, but the door didn't budge. No lock, no bolt. Just resistance, like the wood had fused with the frame over time. I didn't push it. That first night, I set up in the living room. I didn't trust the upstairs flooring, and the bedroom at the front of the house gave me a bad feeling, the kind you can't explain but can't ignore either. I unrolled my sleeping bag, made a fire in the old cast iron stove, and tried to relax. I even opened a can of beans I brought from the city, not trusting whatever lurked behind the dusty pantry shelves. Just before midnight, I heard movement. Not the house settling, not the wind brushing against the windows. This was closer, more deliberate. Slow steps across floorboards, followed by a creaking sound, almost like a drawer being opened and closed again. I froze. The fire had burned down low, casting long shadows across the walls. I listened, breath held, until the sound stopped. I convinced myself it was the wood expanding from the heat. Old places do that. That's what I told myself over and over until I finally passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, I went exploring. The yard was overgrown, but it had structure. Beneath the knee-high grass, I could see stone pathways and the rotted stumps of what used to be fencing. There was an old garden plot near the back, still lined with thin, rusted stakes. A metal chair stood next to it, half buried in soil and vines. I followed the path behind the shed, expecting to find more forest. But instead, I found a small, roofless structure made of stacked stone. It looked like a spring house, though the basin inside was bone dry. The air was cooler there, the kind of chill that sinks into your skin and doesn't let go. I only stood inside for a moment before stepping back out. Something about the space felt wrong, like it had been sealed for a reason, and now that it was open again, it wasn't empty. Back in the house, I decided to try that 4th door again. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe a root cellar, maybe old tools. But the curiosity gnawed at me all morning. I pressed my shoulder into it, leaned my weight forward, and this time it gave way. The smell hit me first. Not decay, not mildew. Something else, like burned leaves and metal. The room was narrow, with walls of stone instead of wood, and a single square window near the ceiling that had been boarded up from the outside. A workbench sat against the far wall, covered in papers. Pages and pages of symbols, diagrams, and handwriting so dense I couldn't make sense of it. One corner of the room had been scorched. Black soot stained the stone, trailing up toward the ceiling. I took a step closer, but the floor shifted beneath me. I looked down and saw it wasn't stone at all. Not entirely. The boards had been laid over something. I crouched, ran my hand along the seam, and found a gap just wide enough to slip my fingers through. I pulled up a section of the floor, expecting dirt, maybe more storage. Instead, I saw glass jars, dozens of them, each one filled with a murky amber liquid, and inside every jar, suspended like a museum specimen, was something unrecognizable. Some looked like roots, others like pieces of small animals. One of them held what I could only describe as a human finger, bloated and pale, the nail dark with rot. I dropped the plank and stepped back, heart hammering in my chest. I left the room and closed the door, then pushed a chair in front of it without even thinking. Later that day, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe it was a preservation experiment, some kind of herbalist collection from a time before refrigeration. But that didn't explain the handwriting. It didn't explain the scorched wall or the feeling I got while standing inside. That pressure in the air, like the room was holding its breath. As the sun began to set, the house shifted again. Not just in sound, but in feeling. The shadows stretched longer than they should have, reaching across rooms they had no business touching. I kept the lights on, even the weak overhead bulbs that flickered when the wind picked up. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, staring through the window into the dark yard. That's when I noticed movement near the tree line. A shape, low to the ground, moving slowly, deliberately. I thought it was a deer until it stepped into the moonlight. It was a dog. At least I think it was. Its body was thick with fur, but patchy, like it had been shaved or scarred. One of its eyes glinted with reflection. The other was dark and sunken. It didn't bark. It didn't move like it was curious or cautious. It moved like it knew exactly where it was going, right toward the shed. I watched it disappear behind the wooden walls, then waited, expecting it to come back out. It never did. I should have gone to bed. Should have told myself it was just a stray, maybe from a nearby property. But instead, I stood at the window for what felt like an hour, staring at the place where it had vanished. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up with the cup still in my hand, cold to the touch, and the faint smell of burned leaves drifting in through the cracked kitchen window. The next morning, I found the shed door wide open. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. It had no latch, just a swollen wooden plank keeping it mostly shut. But now it hung crooked on one hinge, like something heavy had forced its way inside. I stood several feet back, staring at the warped gap in the frame, my skin prickling with that early instinct of danger you can't quite put words to. I wanted to leave it alone. I should have, but instead, I stepped forward and looked inside. The interior was empty, except for a few scattered garden tools and a rusted-out wheelbarrow. But the dirt floor had been disturbed. Something had dug through it, not randomly, but in a circular pattern, the way animals sometimes walk in loops before lying down. At the center was a patch of darkened earth, sunken in, almost like a shallow grave that had been partially covered again. I backed away and didn't return for the rest of the day. Instead, I threw myself into busy work. I scrubbed the windows, cleared out the hall closet, and unpacked more boxes from the car. But even with the distractions, my eyes kept drifting toward the woods. The trees felt closer. The light didn't seem to fall between them the same way it had before, like the forest was watching, shifting, breathing. By evening, I was exhausted but wired. I made dinner, sat by the fire, and tried to read one of the old books left behind in the upstairs study. It was a collection of personal notes from someone named Arthur, though no last name was listed. Most of the entries were dry observations about soil quality, rain levels, pest control. But tucked between the weather reports were stranger lines, phrases that didn't match the tone of the rest. The perimeter holds, but not always. Do not disturb the basin after dark. Light draws them. Sound excites them. Movement invites them. I reread those 3 lines more times than I care to admit. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was smooth, deliberate, not scribbled in panic, not added as an afterthought. It was as if the author was reminding himself of rules he already understood but didn't trust himself to remember. That night, something woke me just before 2 o'clock. I didn't check the time. The house doesn't have a single digital clock, but I could tell by the position of the moon outside the window. The fire had long since gone out. The air was cold, dry, and absolutely still. I lay on my mattress, heart thudding, unable to say why. Then I heard it. A slow dragging sound across the wooden floor above me. It wasn't footsteps. It was heavier than that, like something being pulled or dragged from one room to another. I stared up at the ceiling, not breathing, waiting for the sound to stop. It didn't. Whatever it was moved slowly from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other. Then silence. No thump of it coming back down the stairs, no creak of retreating weight, just an awful heavy pause, like it had stopped right above me and was waiting. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body locked in place, every muscle braced against something I couldn't see. Eventually the quiet returned, too perfect and too sudden to feel real. I waited until the sky began to pale with the first hints of morning before I sat up. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. I kept trying to pretend things were normal, that the noises, the shed, the bizarre entries in the journal, all of it could be rationalized, explained, ignored. But then the animals started showing up. First, it was the squirrels. Not in the trees, not scampering through the brush, but on the porch. 3 of them, all sitting perfectly still, facing the front door, their bodies rigid, tails flat against the rotting boards. I opened the door slowly, thinking they'd scatter. They didn't. They didn't move at all, until I took a step outside. Then they turned simultaneously and ran into the underbrush, not with the erratic darting of startled animals, but in perfect unison like a choreographed retreat. That same afternoon, I noticed more birds perched along the roofline. Not 1 or 2, over a dozen. Crows, maybe. Their feathers were glossy, their heads always turned toward the house, never preening, never calling to each other. Just watching. The pressure in the house grew thicker with each passing day. I stopped lighting fires. I slept with the lantern on. I began keeping the journal near me, flipping back through Arthur's entries for anything I might have missed. And that's when I found the map. It was folded between 2 torn pages near the back. Hand-drawn, with crude symbols and lines marked in charcoal. The house sat at the center. Around it, circles, concentric rings marked with dates, symbols, and short notations. Boundary set 458. Breach recorded 631. Watch the southern tree line. The last entry was the most recent, dated just 2 years before I arrived. Circle incomplete. The route has weakened. I followed the lines of the map out from the house and matched them to landmarks on the property. The garden, the shed, the spring house. But there was one more, a small structure marked in the northern woods. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't gone that far, until now. It took nearly an hour to find the path. The underbrush was thick, and the terrain sloped downward into a dense ravine. But eventually I saw it, a small stone arch, half collapsed, leaning into the hillside. It looked like the remains of a root cellar, but the air pouring out of it was cold and dry, with no hint of rot or earth. Just emptiness. I didn't go in. I stood at the edge, heart pounding, map trembling in my hand, and I listened. There was no wind, no birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing echoing faintly from somewhere deep inside the earth. I left the map there, folded it, placed it just inside the archway, and walked back toward the house without looking over my shoulder. That evening, I locked every door, every window. I didn't light the lantern. I didn't cook dinner. I just sat at the kitchen table, waiting. It started just after 9 o'clock. The front door creaked. Not like it was being forced, like it was being tested, nudged. The kind of push someone gives a door when they're not sure if anyone's home. Then footsteps, not in the house, on the porch. Soft, shuffling steps moving back and forth across the boards, pausing near the window, then returning to the door. The knob turned, slowly, clicked back into place. Then again, a second attempt. I stayed seated, staring at the hallway, muscles locked in place, every instinct screaming to move, to hide, to fight. But I didn't. I couldn't. Eventually the sound stopped, but the feeling didn't. That pressure in the air, that sense of being studied, evaluated. Not like a threat was coming, like it had already arrived and was waiting for me to recognize it. That night, I didn't sleep, not even briefly. I waited until the first light pushed through the kitchen window, then stood, stiff and shaking, and stepped outside. There were footprints on the porch, not boots, not shoes. Bare feet, large, toes splayed wide, heel imprints deep. They led down the steps and disappeared into the grass. I followed them until they vanished in the thick brush, then turned back. When I stepped onto the porch again, I saw something resting on the top step. A jar. One of the same glass jars from the hidden room, only this one was clean, sealed tight, and filled with clear water. Floating inside was a single leaf, perfectly preserved, too green for the season, its veins oddly symmetrical. Tied to the jar with twine was a small strip of paper. No words, just a symbol. One I'd seen before in Arthur's journal, scrawled in the margin beside the phrase, "The old boundary holds." That was 2 days ago. Since then, no new noises, no animals. The house has gone quiet again, but not in the way it did before. Not empty, not abandoned, expectant. I don't know what I unlocked in that back room. I don't know what Arthur was trying to keep at bay. But I know this. Something lives on the edge of this place. In the woods. In the spaces we stopped seeing when we built fences and roads and houses. And it remembers the ones who once knew how to speak its language. I think I was chosen for a reason, not because of blood, not because I'm brave, but because I was desperate enough to come back, to listen. And now, I don't think I can leave. Not because I'm trapped, because I'm part of it now. I've always been a light sleeper, not insomniac level restless. Just someone who wakes up if the ceiling creaks or the thermostat kicks on at the wrong time. So when I started waking up with bruises across my chest, I thought maybe I'd tossed and turned hard enough to slam into my nightstand. The first one showed up in mid-March. I remember because I had just finished reorganizing my room the weekend before. My bed had been moved a few feet closer to the window, and I figured I just needed time to adjust to the new layout. But the bruising kept happening, same spot, same shape. A dull, wide pressure mark that sat like a smudge right over my sternum. I pressed into it once and winced at how deep it went. That morning, I stared at myself in the mirror and thought, maybe I slept with my arms crossed. Maybe I was pressing down on myself all night without realizing it. It sounded weak, even in my head. Around that time, the dreams started changing. I'd never been prone to nightmares before. The worst I ever got was the occasional anxiety dream, missed flights, teeth falling out, that kind of thing. But these were different. They didn't come every night, but when they did, they brought the same feeling, being watched. The first one was almost nothing. Just me walking through an empty hallway that seemed vaguely like my high school but quieter. Every step echoed like I was the only person alive. The lockers were all shut. No doors were open. The lights flickered the way old fluorescents do, and I remember thinking the hum was almost too loud, like it was trying to drown something else out. I turned a corner and saw a silhouette far down the next corridor. Not moving, just standing, facing me. I woke up before anything happened, my heart racing like I'd just run a mile. The next morning there were 2 bruises. I started sleeping on the couch after that. Not because I thought it would help, but because the bedroom had started to feel heavy. The air in there felt warmer than the rest of the apartment, like the walls were breathing. I know that sounds paranoid. I thought the same thing. But when I moved out to the living room, something felt lighter. I fell asleep faster. I even told myself the nightmares were probably done. Then came the night with the door. I was watching something on my laptop, half asleep on the couch, when I heard it. A knock. Just one. Not loud, not frantic. More like someone tapping with their knuckles out of habit, as if they already knew they were being let in. I paused the show, listened. Nothing. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then stood up and crept to the door. Through the peephole, I saw only darkness. My porch light was on, but the bulb was flickering again, barely throwing any light past the doormat. I couldn't see a shape. I couldn't even see the steps, just a haze of dim yellow and shadows. Then I heard it again. Not a knock this time. Footsteps. Fast. They sounded like bare feet slapping the pavement, but coming too quickly. Too smooth, like whoever was moving knew exactly how to avoid every creak and obstacle. I locked the deadbolt, stepped back from the door, and held my breath. The sound passed. Not away from the house, but around it. I heard it curve to the right, along the siding, toward the back patio. The side gate had always been stubborn, the kind that needed a good shove to open. That night, I didn't hear it creak. I didn't hear it at all. What I did hear a few minutes later was the window in my bedroom shift in its frame. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch, blanket around my shoulders, staring at the hallway that led to the bedroom. I didn't move until sunrise. That morning, I went to check the window. It was unlocked. The screen was pushed out from the bottom corner, like something had worked its way inside. I didn't see footprints, but I noticed one of the scratches on the window frame had gone deeper. Not new exactly, but freshened, like it had been retraced. That's when I called my uncle. He used to work in private security. Nothing crazy, just home systems and lock upgrades. But he always had that seen some stuff energy. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I thought someone was casing the place. He offered to swing by that weekend to install new cameras and replace a few locks. I agreed. I didn't mention the bruises. I didn't mention the dreams, but the dreams weren't waiting for me to explain. 2 nights later, I found myself in a new one. It started in a place I didn't recognize, a kind of old workshop with long wooden tables and tools hanging on the walls. It smelled like gasoline and sawdust. I could hear a fan clicking as it rotated overhead, even though there was no breeze. I was walking slowly toward the back of the room when I noticed a shape behind the far table, low to the ground, huddled. At first, I thought it was a dog. The outline was vague, the color wrong, but the size and posture looked familiar. Then it moved. It unfolded upward, the way a marionette might be pulled by invisible strings. Its joints didn't look right. Too long, too fluid. When it turned, it didn't seem surprised to see me. It felt like it had been waiting. The second our eyes met, I heard the fan overhead stop. Not slow down, just stop. No click, no fade. 1 second it was spinning, the next it wasn't. That silence hit like a slap. I woke up drenched in sweat. Not cold this time, hot like I'd been baking under the covers. My heart was pounding, my mouth dry, and there was a tightness in my chest that made it hard to sit up. When I pulled back the blanket, I saw a new bruise, larger than before and darker. It stretched from my collarbone to the top of my ribs. I stared at it, willing it to fade. But even as the panic ebbed, the ache remained. That morning, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just typed in the symptoms, waking up with bruises, nightmares, chest pressure, and scrolled through page after page of garbage. Sleep paralysis, night terrors, Even some paranormal forums full of people describing shadow creatures and ancient demons. I rolled my eyes at most of it, but something about the patterns stuck with me. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was young. She used to say that dreams were places, not just thoughts, but actual spaces where parts of us wandered when our bodies were still. I hadn't thought about that in years. But now, with every new dream, it felt less like I was inventing something and more like I was returning to it. By the following week, the bruises had multiplied. Not just the chest anymore. I found one behind my knee, another along my left bicep. Small, rounded marks, as if something had gripped me hard in the night. I started documenting them. Photos, timestamps, notes about what I remembered from each dream. It became a project, a desperate attempt to make sense of something I couldn't explain. The more I tracked, the more consistent it all seemed. The bruises appeared only after certain dreams, the ones where I saw the thing. Not in full, never clearly, but always nearby. A shoulder slipping behind a doorway, a flash of something hunched under a staircase. Once, I even heard it breathe. The audio came through my dream like static, harsh and low, rattling. It made my stomach twist. I remember pressing my hands over my ears in the dream, but the sound pushed right through, like it wasn't sound at all, but something deeper, a vibration crawling across my skin. By then, I had stopped sleeping with the lights off. It wasn't fear, exactly. Not at first. It was strategy. I figured if the dreams were connected to darkness, that moment between waking and sleep where everything slips out of focus, maybe I could short-circuit it by keeping the environment constant. Soft lamplight, low music, anything to keep my brain from slipping too far. It worked. Once, I had a dream where nothing happened, just an empty field under bright afternoon sun. No movement, no sound, not even a breeze. It should have felt peaceful, but instead it felt like a waiting room, like something was holding its breath, just out of frame. When I woke up, there was no new bruise. That's when I realized something else. It wasn't just the dreams letting it in. It was me. I was starting to expect it, to look for it. I'd wake up and listen for creaks. I'd glance at corners as I passed, waiting for a shape to shift. Every night I told myself not to think about it, and every night I did. I told myself it wasn't real. Just dreams. Just bruises from restless sleep. But then I found the claw. It was wedged in the windowsill. Not long, not sharp, just a chipped, blackened remnant of something. It didn't look like a cat's. Too thick, too curved. And when I touched it, my fingers came away with a faint, oily residue that stung the skin just enough to make me yank back. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of a dream, but because I wasn't sure if I'd still be dreaming when I woke up. I took the claw to a local wildlife control place under the pretense that it might belong to a raccoon or stray. The guy at the desk barely looked at it before handing it back and saying it wasn't from anything he'd ever seen in this state. Said it looked too thick to belong to a mammal and too curved to be from a bird. When I pressed him, he shrugged and said it was probably some weird fragment from a broken tool or backyard junk. I left with it in a paper bag, but I didn't bring it back inside. I threw it in the dumpster behind the gas station and scrubbed my hands in the bathroom sink until they were red. That night, I stayed at a friend's apartment across town. He didn't ask why I showed up with an overnight bag. He just handed me a beer and queued up a movie. And I pretended like nothing was wrong. But when I stepped into his guest room and turned off the light, the old pressure came right back, like a hand pushing gently down on my chest. I tried breathing through it. I tried focusing on anything else. But I still dreamed. This time, it wasn't a hallway or a field. It was a stairwell, one I didn't recognize, spiraling down beneath a building I'd never seen. The walls were rough, unfinished concrete. The only light came from a single bulb at the top, and as I moved lower, that light faded fast. I kept walking, even though I didn't want to. My body felt pulled forward, like gravity had chosen a new direction. I reached a landing and saw a door, cracked just enough to show a sliver of pitch black beyond it. And I heard breathing. Not just one, several. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, and saw that the sheets were pulled halfway off the mattress. There was a new bruise along my collarbone. 3 small circular ones in a line. I stood in the bathroom under fluorescent light, studying the marks like they could answer me. But they never did. I left before sunrise and drove home, trying not to glance at the rearview mirror. When I walked into the apartment, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavier. My bedroom door was open, even though I was sure I'd closed it. The jar of coins I kept on the dresser had been knocked over. Coins spilled in a perfect line leading from the door to the bed. I stepped over them and checked the window. Still latched. No sign of a break-in, but the carpet smelled off, a mix of sulfur and wet earth. That was the first day I let myself wonder if I was being hunted. I called my grandmother that afternoon. Not because I thought she'd know anything, but because I remembered something from years ago. She used to tell me stories about things that sat on your chest at night. She'd mention old wives' tales in a half-joking voice, like they were silly but worth respecting. One of those stories came back to me. Something about a nightmare that follows bloodlines. I didn't believe in any of it. I still don't, but I needed something. Anything. When she answered, I tried to sound casual. I told her I'd been having trouble sleeping, that I'd been waking up with bruises. Her voice tightened. I could hear her shift in her chair, like the air in the room around her had changed too. She didn't laugh. She didn't call it a coincidence. She just asked one thing. "Have you seen its eyes?" The way she said it made my throat dry up. She told me to come over right away. When I got there, she had already laid out a small wooden box on the kitchen table. Inside were a few trinkets, a worn cross, some dried herbs, a folded piece of yellowing paper with handwriting so fine it looked like thread. She told me to sleep with the herbs under my pillow and to recite the words on that page before bed. I didn't ask where it came from. I didn't want to know. That night, I did everything she said. I placed the herbs under my pillow, lit the candle she gave me, and read the prayer aloud, carefully, slowly, word by word. The words were old, the kind that stick in your mouth like syrup. I felt foolish, but also relieved, like the act of doing something gave me a tiny shield. And the dream changed. This time I was back in the stairwell, but the door was closed now, sealed tight. The air was colder, and I could feel the pressure behind the door like a heartbeat. I heard a low growl, steady and deep, pulsing through the concrete. I didn't approach the door. I sat on the step and waited, and nothing came through. The next morning, there were no new bruises, not even a trace. I felt a weight lift. For a whole week, nothing happened. No dreams, no sounds. I started to think maybe the ritual had worked. I stopped sleeping with the lamp on. I even opened the bedroom window again. For the first time in months, I felt like myself. Then, on the 8th day, I found the mark. It wasn't a bruise this time. It was carved into the underside of my nightstand, a shape I didn't recognize. Sharp lines, looping back into themselves like a brand. When I touched it, my finger burned. Not like a cut, like touching a stovetop that had just been turned off. That night, the dreams returned. I found myself in a place that didn't belong to any time. A forest where the trees moved, not swayed, moved, bent back to make way. I was walking a path that changed shape behind me. Branches reached out, then pulled away like something was guiding me forward. I didn't feel alone. At the end of the path stood a clearing. In the center was a shape, not a beast, not a person. Something between the two. It crouched low, breathing slowly, like it had been asleep and was now waking up. Its eyes opened, not glowing, not monstrous, just wide, reflective and yellow, the way a deer's eyes look in headlights right before they bolt. I didn't wake up. I stayed. I watched. It didn't speak, but I felt it. A pressure in my spine, in my chest, behind my teeth, like it was testing me, measuring. I tried to move. My limbs wouldn't respond. I wasn't paralyzed, I was held. Not physically, but completely. Like I'd slipped into the groove of something bigger. Something old. Then I felt it touch my chest. The same spot as the bruises. When I woke, my shirt was soaked. Not from sweat, from blood. A thin trickle down my sternum where a small scratch had opened up. 3 lines, the exact shape I'd seen on the nightstand. I pressed a towel to it, breathing hard, and tried not to think about what that meant. I called my grandmother again. This time I told her everything, every detail I could remember. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked me to come back. Said there was something she hadn't told me. Something about our family. About her sister, who died in her sleep when she was young. About the dreams she used to describe before it happened. When I arrived, she handed me a leather-bound book, handwritten, full of entries dating back decades. Every one of them talked about the same thing. The pressure, the marks, the dreams. A few pages described rituals, ways to keep it out, but none claimed to stop it for good. She looked at me, her eyes soft but tired, and said one thing I'll never forget. It doesn't kill, it changes. I asked what that meant. She didn't answer. The next few nights blurred. I slept in shifts, I drank tea, I avoided the window, but it didn't matter. The dreams came anyway, always the same eyes, the same pressure, the same sense that I was being shaped, worn down. On the last night, I woke up in the field again, empty, quiet. A single figure stood across from me, human in shape but wrong in the posture. Tall, bent forward, arms too long. It didn't move, it just looked at me. And then it smiled. I woke up with blood in my mouth. No cuts, no explanation. My gums were fine, my teeth were fine, but the taste lingered for hours. The bruise was gone. That was 2 months ago. I don't have the dreams anymore. No bruises, no marks. But I still wake up at odd hours. I still hear things moving in the walls. Sometimes, when I pass mirrors, I catch a glimpse of something off in my reflection. The angle of my shoulders, the width of my mouth. My friends say I've changed. They say my voice sounds different. My laugh isn't the same. I don't remember laughing at all. Sometimes I sit in the dark and wonder if the dreams ever ended, or if I just never woke up. I had been pushing myself too hard for months. Between the demands of my job and the fallout from a downsizing restructure, I'd become a different version of myself. Wired, irritable, and strangely detached. I finally blacked out at my desk during a long shift, and when I came to, I was staring at the white ceiling of an emergency room. The blood work came back normal. The doctor said the fainting was likely caused by stress, maybe compounded by dehydration. He didn't seem particularly concerned. He told me to take it as a warning and rest, not a suggestion. A warning. I didn't argue. I knew what he meant. My hands had started to tremble without reason in the mornings. I'd been forgetting small things like names, dates, and how long I'd been staring at the same spreadsheet. I felt like I was glitching in and out of my own life, walking into rooms with no idea why I was there. So, I took a few days off and started looking for a place to go, somewhere quiet and disconnected. I remembered a spot I'd visited once in high school during a camping trip. It was hours from the city, up in the hills, surrounded by a nature preserve that hadn't been developed. There were no real attractions, just a few dusty trails and a dried-up lake bed that barely showed up on the map. I figured that would be good enough. I packed light, just some basic gear, a small flashlight, a reusable bottle, and a thermos of coffee. I left my phone in my kitchen drawer, which was a first. I told myself it was because I didn't want distractions, but part of me just didn't want anyone reaching me. I needed the silence. I arrived around 11 o'clock that morning. The closest thing to a town was more like a row of abandoned shops with sun-faded signage and one tiny gas station that also served as a check-in desk for the trail system. I spoke to a woman behind the counter, maybe in her 60s, who handed me a printed map that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. She circled the longest trail with a red marker, told me it looped up and over the ridge and came back down near the parking lot. Supposedly, if I kept a steady pace, I could finish it in 4 hours or less. It felt good being out there. The air had that dry, piney sharpness that I hadn't smelled in years. The sound of gravel crunching under my boots felt almost meditative. I was alone, but not lonely. At least, not at first. The trail was narrow but well marked. It wound through a corridor of tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight, casting long vertical shadows across the path. I noticed how quiet it was, not peaceful, but empty. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush, just the occasional creak of old branches shifting in the breeze. I passed a broken wooden bench, half buried in weeds, about 40 minutes in and decided to stop for a few minutes. My legs were already starting to feel it, but I told myself that was part of the point. I was supposed to feel something again. Anything other than the numb repetition of emails and fluorescent lighting. That's when I started to feel watched. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing moved, nothing snapped. I just felt the sensation of being observed. It settled into my chest like a weight I couldn't explain. I glanced over both shoulders, scanned the tree line, and listened. Nothing, but I still felt it. I stood up and kept walking, chalking it up to nerves. City instincts. Our brains look for eyes in the dark when we're alone. It's how we survived, right? The trail curved sharply around a rocky incline, and the slope on the left dropped off steeply into thick vegetation. The ridgeline was above me now, still a long way off, but visible in glimpses through the trees. The higher I climbed, the colder it got, and the stillness became harder to ignore. I hadn't seen a single other person since I left the parking lot. No footprints in the dust, no wrappers, no signs of life. I started to feel uncertain about the time. Without my phone or a watch, I had no way to know how long I'd really been out there. The light filtering through the canopy stayed stubbornly the same, pale and indirect. It made it hard to tell whether it was early afternoon or something closer to dusk. Then I heard something. At first I thought it was wind, but it wasn't moving the branches. It was too soft, almost like someone clearing their throat, far off. Then a voice, sharp, not loud, but too clear to mistake for anything else. It came from up ahead, around the next bend. I froze. It wasn't words at first, just a single muffled outburst, like frustration or fear. Then something clearer. "Let me go." It was a man's voice, strained, angry, and desperate. My pulse jumped in my neck. I didn't move. My body just locked into place. Every instinct told me not to keep walking, that if I rounded that corner, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to, something I couldn't forget. But another part of me, the rational part, the part that knew I couldn't just leave someone behind, forced my legs forward. I crept toward the bend in the trail and stopped just short of the corner, listening. Nothing, just wind now, leaves brushing together, distant, empty silence. I waited another few seconds before stepping forward. The trail curved gently, and when I reached the other side, there was nothing there. No person, no sound, just the continuation of the path as it climbed higher toward the ridge. I waited, looked around, then took another step. A low branch scratched my arm as I passed under it, and that stupid, creeping thought entered my head. The idea that someone had been there, that I'd just missed them, or worse, that they were still close and watching. I turned around and began walking back the way I came. I didn't run, not yet, but I walked faster. Each step felt heavier. My breath became shallow, and I felt the heat of adrenaline pushing out into my fingertips. The trees looked different now, like they were leaning inward, closer. After 10 minutes, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The trail still twisted through the same terrain, but the details were wrong. A sharp turn I swore I remembered was gone. The slope on the left side had shifted. It was rising now, not falling away. My heart began to pound harder. I tried to trace my path back by memory alone. A few minutes later, I spotted a bush with sharp red thorns and paused beside it. Something caught my eye, a small scrap of fabric tangled on a branch. I stepped closer. It was dark green, soft, the same kind of synthetic material my shirt was made from. I reached up and touched my side. There was a tear, a matching one. I stared at the branch, then at the path ahead. That bush was behind me. I'd passed it an hour earlier. That meant I hadn't gone back down the trail. I'd looped somehow, gone in a circle. I turned around and walked faster this time. I wasn't trying to stay calm anymore. I just needed to get out. Every 10 steps, I looked over my shoulder. There was still nothing, no movement, no other hikers, no voice, but the feeling of being followed never left me. The light stayed the same. That was the part that broke something in my head. It didn't change. I couldn't tell if I was losing time or if the sun had stopped moving. Shadows didn't stretch. They just shifted slightly as the breeze moved the branches. I started to feel dizzy, like the air was thinner. Eventually, I stopped moving. My legs were shaking too much. I sat down on a rock, clutching my knees, and listened. No birds, no bugs, no wind. It was like the forest had closed itself around me. I felt pressure in my ears like I was underwater. Then I heard it again. This time it was behind me. Let me go, not shouted, just spoken, like a whisper, right at my back. I stood up and ran. I didn't think. I didn't check my footing. I just ran. The trail blurred beneath my boots, dry leaves and loose pebbles scattering as I tore through the brush. Branches slapped my arms and caught on my clothes, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned. My ribs felt like they were splitting open. The silence had turned into a kind of pressure, a thick weight pushing in on all sides, and I wanted out of it more than I'd ever wanted anything. The trail wound sharply, forcing me to slow down or risk tumbling off the edge into the undergrowth. As I rounded one bend, I lost my footing on loose gravel and slammed my knee into a rock. I dropped to the ground hard, clutching my leg, biting my tongue to keep from crying out. That was when I heard it again. Footsteps, not from ahead, from the ridge above. Too fast to be an animal, too heavy, and then they stopped. Not faded, just stopped. I forced myself up and hobbled forward. The pain in my knee made every step miserable, but I didn't care. I needed to move. I needed distance between myself and whatever was watching me. I couldn't think clearly anymore. I was stuck in the kind of fear that scrambles your thoughts, where even memory stops making sense. That's when I saw it. Another thorn bush. Same red branches, same tight twist of vines. I felt a sinking weight in my stomach before I even looked. I already knew what would be there. Another scrap of green fabric. My fabric. I hadn't gone in a circle. I'd somehow passed the same place twice from different directions. The trail wasn't repeating itself, it was changing. I tried to tell myself I was wrong, that the bushes just looked similar, that I was panicking and misjudging the route. But the fabric was identical. It was torn the same way. Even the frayed threads were arranged in the same pattern. It was mine. I kept walking, slower now. My throat was dry, and the silence made my ears ring. I passed landmarks that didn't belong there. A rusted metal pole buried in the ground with nothing attached to it. A line of stones stacked neatly beside the trail, almost too neatly, arranged like a boundary or a warning. My knee throbbed, but the fear made it easy to ignore. I just wanted to get back to my car. I kept thinking that over and over. Get to the car, lock the doors, drive. Drive until the sky looked normal again. The next time I turned a corner, the forest opened slightly. The trail dipped downward into a clearing, and in the center was a structure. Not a building, just 4 concrete walls with no roof. It looked like the remains of an old pump house, or something similar. Cracked and crumbling, covered in vines. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. I didn't want to go down there. Every inch of my body resisted the idea, but the trail led straight through it. There was no other way forward, no path around. I walked slowly, scanning the tree line, listening. The air was dead still. My footsteps felt louder than they should have. As I reached the middle of the clearing, I turned to look at the structure. That's when I saw the writing. It had been scratched into the concrete long ago by the look of it. Shallow letters, uneven, carved by hand. The words were jagged, like whoever wrote them was in a rush or trembling. Not alone, I stepped back instinctively. That phrase hit something deep in me. It wasn't a warning, it was a confirmation. The sense I'd been carrying that I was being followed, watched, it was real. Someone else had felt it, left a message, and then what? I turned to keep moving, but something shifted in the corner of my vision. I spun around fast, searching the tree line. Nothing moved. No wind, no sound, no shapes, just the same narrow trunks and clusters of brush. I waited. Still nothing. Then a crack, far off, like a stick breaking under weight. Then silence again. I backed out of the clearing and returned to the trail, heart racing, mouth dry. I didn't care where I ended up anymore. I just kept walking. I stopped trying to track direction or time. I didn't even look down when I passed the bush again, though I knew it was the same one. The one with my shirt caught on it. The air felt thinner now, harder to breathe. Not just altitude, something else. Like the pressure was building. That's when the terrain started to change. The trail wasn't curving anymore. It was narrowing. The trees were pressing closer together, branches lowering, the sky shrinking above me. And then I saw a sign. A wooden trail marker, half rotted and illegible. It wasn't the same one from earlier. I hadn't passed this before. I followed the narrowing trail for several minutes until I reached a split. The main path continued forward, but a faint side trail veered off to the right, disappearing into thicker woods. And on that side trail, about 10 steps in, I saw something impossible. Another piece of green fabric, fresh, bright, draped across a low branch like it had just caught there. I didn't put that one there. I hadn't gone that way. I stood completely still, staring at it, trying to understand what I was seeing. That was when I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone else in the woods. Not ahead, behind. I turned around slowly, heart hammering, mouth open just slightly so I could breathe without making sound. I scanned the path behind me. Nothing. Just the same brush and trees and quiet. But the quiet wasn't the same anymore. It had a shape to it, a rhythm. It felt like something was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. I took one step backward, then another. Then I turned and started walking, faster now, not running, but close to it. I didn't know if I was being watched or followed, but I knew I had to keep going. The forest didn't feel passive anymore. It felt deliberate, like it was folding in around me. At some point, I stopped seeing anything familiar. The trail looked wrong, not just different, altered. The slope had changed direction again, and now I was climbing. I hadn't climbed in over an hour. That's when I saw the final sign, carved into the dirt this time. Fresh, like it had been dragged with a stick. The letters were deep and ragged, uneven. I don't know how long it had been there. I don't know who made it, but the message was clear. You never left. I stared at it for a long time. Too long. I don't know what I was hoping for. A trick of the light. A sign it wasn't meant for me. But I couldn't deny what I was feeling. The dizziness, the disorientation, the impossible repetition of the same path. The sound of my own voice echoing back at me. Because that was the last thing I heard before I finally broke. My own voice. The same words I'd heard earlier, high on the ridge. Not spoken by me, but in my exact voice. Let me go. It didn't come from ahead. It came from the trees. That's when I screamed. Not words, just sound. Rage and panic and hopelessness pouring out of my throat like it had been waiting all day. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, digging my fingers into the dirt. I don't remember how I got back. I only remember the sound of gravel under tires, the shape of my car in the distance, the smell of hot plastic from the dashboard, the sun hanging low on the horizon. It was 6:20 p.m. I had left that morning at 11 o'clock. I should have been back by 4 o'clock at the latest. I spent over 7 hours on a 4-hour trail, and somehow I ended exactly where I started. I never told anyone the full story. I told people I got lost, twisted my knee, had to double back. I pretended to laugh about it. I made it sound like a stupid mistake, but deep down I knew better. Something was wrong in those woods. I don't know if I really left. Some nights I wake up with the taste of pine needles in my mouth and the smell of dirt on my hands. I find myself standing in front of the kitchen drawer where I left my phone that morning, staring at it like I forgot something. And sometimes I hear a voice in the woods behind my building. Quiet, but clear. Let me go. It was early October when I took a few days off work to help my uncle prep his cabin for the winter. The place sat near the tree line, about 15 kilometers outside a mountain town I hadn't been to since I was a kid. He wasn't really my uncle in the bloodline sense. He was my father's cousin, but everyone in the family called him Uncle anyway. I knew him mostly through stories about how he'd gone off the grid in his 40s and never looked back. A lot of people saw him as eccentric. I just thought he preferred silence. The cabin was rough, but solid. No electricity, no plumbing, just a stone chimney, an old iron stove, and a well out back that needed its rope replaced. When I arrived, he was splitting kindling on the side of the porch with a worn axe that looked older than I was. He greeted me with a nod and a pat on the shoulder, then went right back to working like no time had passed. I liked that about him. No unnecessary words. We spent most of that day stacking wood, patching a gap in the roof, and cleaning out a storage shed that had almost collapsed under its own weight. The place reeked of wet leaves and old rust. I didn't complain. I needed a break from the noise of where I lived. And there was something calming about being in a place where the only sounds were wind, birds, and the distant creak of trees shifting in the breeze. It wasn't until the sun started falling behind the ridge that I noticed how quickly the temperature dropped. Shadows poured between the trees like smoke. The silence deepened in a way that felt strange. Not peaceful, but hollow. Like something had sucked the sound out of the woods. I mentioned it to my uncle, and he nodded, not really looking at me. "Gets quiet up here," he said. "Too quiet sometimes." I laughed a little, trying to shake off the unease, and told him I'd head back into town before it got too late. I had a rental car parked about a kilometer down the road, just past a weathered trail marker shaped like a cross. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there wiping his hands on an old rag, eyes on the tree line. "You could stay," he said. "Be easier, safer too." I knew he wasn't joking, but I tried to keep the mood light. "What? You think I'll get lost in the dark and eaten by a bear?" His face didn't change. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not just physically tired, but drained. Like someone who'd lived with a secret for too long. "There's things out here you don't want to bump into after dark," he said. "Better to stay close to firelight." It wasn't the kind of warning you could laugh off. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I stood there, halfway between agreeing and brushing it off, then said I'd be fine. I thanked him, promised to come back in a few weeks, and started walking toward my car. The path was narrow, partly overgrown and covered in slick leaves. I walked fast, hoping to beat the last of the light. I didn't like how the air felt. Not cold, but dense, like something pressing against my ears. By the time I reached the trail marker, it was hard to tell what direction the wind was coming from. Every tree creaked the same way. Every bush looked just slightly too still. I unlocked the car, got in, and sat there for a moment without turning the key. That's when I saw something. There was a man standing at the edge of the road about 20 meters back, just inside the trees. He wasn't moving. His arms were at his sides. I thought maybe he'd followed me from the cabin, but when I blinked, he was gone. Not walked away. Gone. I got out, thinking maybe my eyes had adjusted wrong, or I'd seen a reflection. But the space was empty, just dark branches and leaf litter. No footsteps, no sound. I stood there for a full minute before getting back in and locking the door. That's when I realized I hadn't heard any insects. No crickets, no chirps, nothing. It felt like something had hit mute on the whole forest. I didn't even want to start the engine, like the sound might call attention to me. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, heart hammering harder than it should have been. Eventually, I turned the key. The headlights came on, slicing through the woods in sharp beams. I didn't see anyone. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the light. The trees out here were dense. My brain was just filling in gaps. That's all it was. I drove slow down the winding road toward town, eyes fixed on the shoulders of the road in case another shape appeared. Nothing did, but that feeling, that crawling sensation up my spine, it didn't leave. I didn't have a place booked, so I checked into a motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where the rooms smelled like old water and the wallpaper peeled around the vents. I didn't care. I just needed a locked door. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called my uncle and told him I'd seen someone on the road. He was quiet for a long time, then asked if the man had said anything. I told him no, he hadn't moved. He was just there, staring. I figured he was part of the old stories, I said, trying to make light of it. That's not a story, he replied. It's a warning. That day, I went back up to the cabin. I told myself it was just to grab the jacket I'd left hanging on a nail by the door, but truthfully, I needed to see it in daylight. I needed it to look normal again. The drive was uneventful. The trees looked less menacing under the sun, but as soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt it again. The pressure, the weight in the air. It wasn't imagination. It was too specific, too heavy. My uncle was splitting wood again, just like before. He glanced at me, then motioned toward the porch. I figured you'd be back. I asked him what he meant by that, and he said nothing. Just handed me a mug of hot water with a bit of dried mint floating on top. We sat on the steps. No words. Just the sound of the axe blade hitting the stump every few seconds. Finally, I asked him directly, what did he mean by calling it a warning? He leaned back, stretching his arms across his knees. There are places in these hills where the ground's been soaked with blood longer than anyone's been alive. Old wounds, old voices. You think a thing dies just because people forget its name? I didn't know how to answer that. He stood up, went inside, and came back with something wrapped in cloth. It was a metal object, dark and corroded. It looked like part of an old canteen or maybe a flask. The sides were etched with symbols I didn't recognize. I found this on the ridge 20 years ago, he said, right after my dog disappeared. Took me a day to find him. He was curled under a rock face like he'd been whipped. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, just stared at the trees. I took the object, turning it over in my hands. The metal was cold, even in the sun. You ever feel like something watched you here? I asked. He didn't answer at first, just looked toward the woods again. I've lived in this cabin for almost 30 years, he said, and I've never once stepped off that porch after sunset. I stayed silent. The longer I sat there, the more it felt like something was building in the space around us. Not a sound, not a smell, just a presence, like a storm that never broke. When I finally got up to leave, he pressed the wrapped metal object into my hand. Take it, he said. Keep it close, and if you hear music, don't follow it. That last line stuck with me. It didn't fit with anything else he'd said. I thought maybe it was part of a superstition, like leaving bread out for the dead or tying red string around your wrist. But something in his eyes made me take it seriously. That night, I drove to a trail overlook just outside of town, sat on the hood of the car, and tried to clear my head. I didn't feel like going back to the motel. I didn't feel like being inside. I just needed air. The stars were starting to come out, scattered across the sky like ash. The wind moved through the trees in long, slow breaths. I thought about turning on the radio, but didn't. I wanted to be able to hear, in case something moved. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it. A sound. Faint. Too faint at first to be sure. Then stronger. It wasn't a song exactly, more like a rhythm. a pattern of notes that didn't match anything familiar. It wasn't coming from the trees, it was coming from the road behind me. I turned, heart stuttering in my chest. There was no one there. But the music continued. Soft, measured, drawing closer. I didn't move at first. I just sat there with my back to the car, staring down the road, trying to convince myself the sound was in my head. But it wasn't. It had weight, distance. It carried through the air like something real. The rhythm was uneven, almost like a chant. Low and repetitive, too slow to be a song, too structured to be random. I slid off the hood and stood with my hand resting on the door handle. Every instinct told me to get in, to start the engine and drive straight back to town. But I stayed there, listening. The sound faded, then swelled again, like it was drifting through the trees in loops. That was when I realized it wasn't coming from a single direction. It was moving, not closer, not farther, just circling, like it was looking for something, or someone. I got in the car, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine hesitated before turning over. When the headlights came on, I aimed them into the dark, searching for a shape or figure. There was nothing, just the road and the trees and that sound floating just beyond reach. I drove back toward town without looking in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see anything behind me. I kept the radio off, the windows up, and my grip on the wheel tight. My heart didn't settle until I pulled into the gravel lot outside the motel. Even then, I waited inside the car for a few minutes before getting out. The air was still, dead still, like the wind had stopped moving altogether. Inside my room, I double-locked the door and checked every corner, closet, under the bed, behind the curtains. I even opened the bathroom cabinet, like something might be hiding there. Then I sat on the edge of the mattress and placed the wrapped metal object on the nightstand. The motel had cheap curtains, the kind that let light leak through in thin yellow slits. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that same low rhythm looping in the back of my mind. I started wondering if it was ever real at all, or if my uncle had put the thought in my head, and now I was hearing ghosts that weren't there. Around 4 o'clock, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Not heavy, not fast, just slow, steady steps moving past my window. I held my breath and waited. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. I could see a faint shadow move across the curtain, right where the slit of light showed through. Then nothing. No knock, no voice, just silence. I stayed completely still until the sun began to rise. Even then, I waited until the shadow disappeared and the birds started chirping again, before I dared open the door. The gravel was undisturbed, no footprints, no sign of anyone having been there. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. I left that morning without checking out. Just dropped the key at the front desk and drove back to the cabin. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought my uncle would know what to do. Maybe I just didn't want to be alone. When I arrived, he was inside, boiling water over the stove. He didn't act surprised to see me. He didn't ask why I came back. He just poured 2 cups and sat down across from me. "I heard it last night," I said. "It was on the road. It followed me." He nodded slowly, then looked toward the window like he was remembering something. "It always comes back eventually," he said. I asked him what it was. He stared at the wall for a long time before speaking. "Back when I first moved out here, there was another cabin about 2 kilometers northeast. Belonged to a man named Corin, hermit type. Didn't talk much, but we helped each other when we needed it. One winter, he went missing. Nobody noticed at first. No one really visited. When the snow melted, a search team went out. They found his door open. Fire had long gone out. No signs of struggle, just a trail of bare footprints leading out behind the cabin. I listened without interrupting. They followed the trail for about 50 meters before it just stopped. Not faded, not snowed over. Stopped, like he'd been lifted straight off the ground. That same week, I started hearing music at night. Same kind of rhythm you're describing. It always started quiet, then moved. I didn't understand what it was at first. Then I made the mistake of following it. My throat went dry. "What did you see?" His jaw clenched. The kind of look someone gets when their body remembers something before their mind does. "There was a shape," he said. "Not human, not animal, just a shape in the dark. It moved like it was dragging something behind it." I don't remember much after that. I woke up in the creek bed a kilometer from home, covered in cuts I couldn't explain. Ever since then, I don't leave the porch after dark. I asked him why he stayed. He smiled a little, but there was no warmth in it. Some things you don't run from, you just keep them at bay. That night, I agreed to stay. I didn't want to be alone again. He lit a fire in the stove, and we pulled our chairs close. He handed me the metal object again, told me to keep it nearby, said it was found in a shallow grave near the old boundary trail, the one locals don't walk anymore. I sat by the fire for hours, watching the shadows shift on the wooden walls. Around midnight, we heard it again. The sound, faint at first, then louder. It wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was above us, around us, like the whole forest was humming. My uncle didn't speak, just sat with his hands wrapped around a cup of water, knuckles white. I couldn't tell if he was afraid or just resigned. The music kept circling, sometimes close, sometimes far, like it was weaving through the trees in a pattern only it understood. Then came the knock, not on the door, on the window behind us. 3 soft taps. I turned to look, but he grabbed my arm. "Don't," he said. "Don't acknowledge it." My heart was racing so fast I thought it might give out. The taps came again, slower this time, more deliberate. We sat frozen, staring at the fire like it was the only safe thing in the room. Then it stopped. No footsteps, no retreating sounds, just gone. The silence that followed was worse. I waited, barely breathing, for something else. But nothing came. The fire burned low. The room went colder. Eventually, I fell asleep in the chair, too afraid to move. When I woke, the window was open, just a few inches, but it had definitely been closed the night before. I didn't say anything, just stood and shut it slowly, checking the latch twice. My uncle was already up, outside, walking the perimeter with his eyes on the treetops. I asked if he'd heard anything else after I fell asleep. He said no. I didn't believe him. That afternoon, I said I needed to leave. Not just the cabin, the town, the whole area. He didn't argue. He just handed me the object again and told me never to toss it out. That some things don't follow you unless you give them a reason. I drove away without looking back. I spent the next few days staying with a friend 2 towns over, somewhere flat, open, no woods. I tried to forget it, told myself I'd imagined most of it. But even in that safe, bright little house, I felt watched. The nights were long. The music never came back, but I started dreaming about it. Always the same rhythm. Always that same shape behind the trees. One night, about a week later, I woke to find the metal object on my nightstand vibrating. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but I could feel it through the mattress. A deep, slow pulse, like a heartbeat made of stone. I picked it up, hands shaking, and it stopped. That's when I saw the shadow under the door. Just a thin line of darkness where the hallway light was blocked. I thought maybe it was my friend walking past the room, but the shadow didn't move. It stayed right there, like someone standing still, just waiting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched that line of darkness for what felt like hours. Then it slipped away. Not walked. Slipped. Like liquid vanishing under the frame. I left that house the next day and haven't been back since. Now I live in a second-floor apartment in the middle of a city. No trees, no woods, just concrete and noise. But even here, sometimes late at night, I hear it again. That faint, rhythmic sound, like a chant, just outside the window. It's been over 6 months since I left the cabin, but the events haven't faded. If anything, the memory has become sharper. Like a blade I keep finding tucked beneath everything else. The shape of it hasn't dulled, and neither has the fear. I never went back to see my uncle. We talked a few times on the phone, but even those conversations felt strained. He never asked how I was sleeping. never asked if the object was still with me. I think he already knew. I could hear it in his voice, that distant, flat tone people get when they've decided there's no way out of something, like someone waiting for a tide to take them. The object stayed in a drawer for a while, wrapped in the same cloth he gave it to me in, but I could still feel it. I tried putting it inside a shoebox, then inside a metal tin, but that dull vibration, that subtle humming pulse, still reached me. It was never loud, it was never obvious, but it was always there. After a month, I started sleeping with earplugs. Then I bought a white noise machine, then two. I filled the room with the sound of static and humming fans just to drown out the quiet, because that's when I'd hear it. The rhythm, always in the distance, always circling. I tried to convince myself it was all psychological, a trauma loop. Maybe I was having a stress response. Maybe the fear had imprinted on me like a dream I hadn't shaken off. But no amount of logic made it stop, and nothing explained the smell. It started as a faint metallic scent, like rusted iron or old coins. It clung to the corners of the room. No matter how much I cleaned, no matter how many windows I opened, it came back. Always strongest between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. The same window every time, the one facing the alley. At first I ignored it. Then I started closing the blinds and pulling the curtain tight. I even bought blackout panels just to stop the light from leaking through. But one night I woke to find the curtain drawn halfway open, not blown by wind, not disturbed by anything I could explain. Just parted, exactly halfway, as if something had been looking in. I called my landlord the next day and asked about the unit's previous tenant. He told me it had been vacant for almost a year before I moved in. Said the last guy left suddenly. No forwarding address, just one rent check short and a box of belongings left behind in the basement. I asked if I could see it. He seemed surprised but agreed to meet me that afternoon. The basement was nothing special. Concrete floor, low ceiling, single bulbs swinging from a cord. But in the back corner, tucked behind an old furnace, was a taped-up cardboard box. Inside was a worn jacket, a paperback book, a cracked coffee mug, and something wrapped in cloth. Not the same cloth as mine, but similar. Same tight fold, same deliberate wrapping. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't need to. I left the box where it was and didn't mention what I'd found. The landlord just shrugged and said people leave weird things behind all the time. I nodded, thanked him, and went back upstairs with a sickness blooming in my stomach. That night, I put my wrapped object inside a plastic storage bin, snapped the lid shut, and took it to the nearest river. I thought maybe I could get rid of it. Maybe it was just a relic. Maybe letting it sink to the bottom of a fast-moving current would break whatever connection it had. I parked near the overpass and carried the bin down to the embankment. The water was high and fast, foaming around the rocks. I stood there for a long time, holding it over the edge, waiting, listening. Then I heard it again, the music, not faint this time, not distant. It was close, right behind me. I turned, but the embankment was empty. No footsteps, no breeze, just the sound, steady and awful, threading between the spaces in my mind like it had always belonged there. I dropped the bin into the river and watched it vanish into the current. The sound stopped. For the first time in weeks, I felt light. I drove home in silence, slept the whole night through. No sounds, no dreams, just sleep. But the next morning, the curtain was open again, and the smell was stronger. Not just metal now, not just rust. There was something else, something old, like damp soil and burned wood. It clung to my clothes, my pillow. Even the water in the kitchen tap had a faint taste to it, like ash. That day, I bought a camera and set it up to face the window. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed proof if I was going to keep losing sleep over something I couldn't explain. I left it running overnight. In the morning, I checked the footage. There was nothing at first, just the soft shifting of shadows. Then, around 3 o'clock, the curtain moved. Not blown, not dragged. It parted slowly, smoothly, like a hand had pushed it open, but no one was there. The timestamp kept ticking, the image stayed still, but the curtain remained open for exactly 4 minutes before falling shut again. No breeze, no change in air pressure, just movement. That night, I bolted the window shut from the inside and placed a chair under the handle. I didn't care how ridiculous it looked. I just wanted to feel like I'd done something. Around 2:30, I woke up to a different sound, not music. Breathing, slow, measured, right beside the bed. I didn't open my eyes, I didn't move. I just lay there with my heart pounding in my chest, counting each breath that wasn't mine. 5, 6, 7, then silence. When I finally looked, the room was empty. The curtain was closed. The chair was still in place. The bolt hadn't moved, but the smell was suffocating, like mold and iron mixed with something rotten. I opened the window to let the air out and left it that way the rest of the night. In the morning, I found something on the floor beneath the sill, a strip of old cloth, faded and damp, almost identical to the one my uncle had used to wrap the object. It was torn along one edge and the middle was stained dark. I didn't touch it, just stared at it like it might crawl away if I blinked. I called my uncle again, told him everything, the music, the breathing, the footage, the cloth. I expected him to tell me what to do, to give me another rule, another way to keep it out. But all he said was, "You shouldn't have thrown it away." I asked why. "Because it wasn't just a thing," he said. "It was a marker. It told the forest you'd been claimed. Taking it away didn't sever the bond. It just made you harder to find. Now it has to come looking." I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Eventually, I moved again. Different state, different name. I told my job I needed medical leave and disappeared into a sublet downtown with no windows in the bedroom. I thought maybe it would end if I broke the pattern, if I became someone else entirely. But it found me again. It didn't knock this time. It didn't open curtains or breathe beside the bed. It left something under my pillow. Not a message, not a threat, just a strip of cloth. Same fold, same weight, same smell. It's quiet now. Most nights, I don't hear anything, but I can feel it watching, waiting, like a song caught in the back of my throat. And sometimes when I pass a mirror at night, I swear I see something behind me, just for a second. Just enough to recognize the outline. Same posture, same shape, no face, and then it's gone. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it ever needed the object. Maybe the cloth was just bait, a way to see who would hold on long enough to be noticed. Maybe the real trap was attention, curiosity, memory. All I know is that the quieter my life gets, the louder it becomes. So I've started sleeping with the radio on. Not music, not voices, just static, pure, unbroken static. Because when it's quiet, it listens. And when it listens, it comes closer. Ever since I was 8 years old, there was one night every year I hated more than anything else. It wasn't Halloween or the anniversary of a death or anything people usually expect. It was my birthday, and not because of the aging or the attention. It was because of the silence. I don't mean the absence of sound. I mean the deliberate kind. The kind where no one dares to speak too loudly, where the lights are dimmed earlier than usual, where the corners of the house feel colder than they should be. My parents never gave a reason, and I gave up asking by the time I turned 12. Every year, without fail, the house would feel like a museum by the time evening came. My mom would pull the curtains tight. My dad would make sure the front and back doors were double locked before sunset. Even the dog would seem to understand something was off, always curling up in the hallway instead of sleeping near the fireplace. I remember once, when I was 10, I asked my dad why we didn't celebrate my birthday the way other families did. He said, "We do celebrate, we just do it differently." Then he handed me a single cupcake, no candle, and told me to finish it before dark. I used to think it was religious. Or maybe something bad happened on the day I was born. But over time, it stopped mattering. Whatever it was, they didn't want me to know. The routine never changed. Dinner before 6 o'clock. Bedroom door closed before 7. Lights off by 7:30. Not a second later. No mirrors in my room. My mom had taken those down years ago, even the tiny one I had inside a desk drawer. I remember the screw holes still being visible on the wall for a while. When I asked her why, she just said mirrors weren't healthy for kids my age. By the time I turned 17, the weirdness had worn me down. I'd stopped caring about the rules. I'd gotten used to the quiet routine. No parties, no candles, no singing, just dim lights, drawn curtains, and early sleep. But that year, something didn't go according to plan. It started with a minor change. My mom was late coming home. She had gone to pick up groceries and didn't return until after 5 o'clock, which was unusual. I watched her through the living room window as she pulled into the driveway, her posture stiff, her head turning sharply like she was watching something over her shoulder. She parked and got out quickly, slamming the door harder than necessary. I noticed she didn't grab any bags. She just locked the car and came inside empty-handed. I was sitting on the arm of the couch, texting a classmate about a group project. I remember hearing her keys hit the hallway table and her voice call out, "Upstairs, now." That was it. No hello, no explanation. I obeyed, out of habit, not fear. But as I climbed the stairs, I glanced over the banister and noticed the dining room mirror still hanging above the credenza. It had always been there, a tall rectangular mirror framed in dark oak. And every year on my birthday, she'd cover it with a long linen cloth and tape down the edges. But this time, it was uncovered. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She was in a rush. Maybe she just forgot. But later that night, that mirror would be all I could think about. I laid in bed fully clothed. It was barely 7:20 when my dad tapped on the door and told me to shut off the lights. I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, trying to distract myself, when the hallway light clicked off. That was the cue. Time to stay still. Time to pretend it was just another early bedtime. But I wasn't sleepy. Not even close. I remember hearing something faint around 8 o'clock. A sound from downstairs. It wasn't loud, just a gentle creak, like someone adjusting their weight on the dining room chair. I brushed it off. Old house, settling wood, wind against the walls, all the usual excuses. Except it wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the house. About an hour later, I realized I hadn't seen the hallway light come back on. My parents usually turned it on at 10 o'clock. Some strange ritual, maybe. But that night, it stayed dark. I waited, watched the gap under my door. Nothing. Around 10:15, I got up. I told myself I just needed water. That's all. But deep down, I think I was already uneasy. Something about the silence felt off. Not just cautious, but expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath. I walked quietly down the hall, avoiding the third plank from the top because it creaked. I moved past my parents' door. Their room was shut tight, no light underneath. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused. I could see the faint reflection of moonlight on the mirror downstairs. It was still uncovered, and now it was angled slightly toward the stairs. I thought that was strange. It had always been fixed flat to the wall. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Then I descended, step by step, carefully. My socks muffled the sound against the wood. The air felt colder as I reached the landing. Not in a physical way, but in a way that made my skin crawl, like walking into a basement that's been locked up for years. I passed through the living room, turned toward the kitchen for water, but I stopped again. That mirror, it was still angled, still reflecting the stairs, and me. I looked at it, only for a second, but I looked, and what I saw didn't make sense. It was me, yes, same height, same clothes, but my arms hung stiffly at my sides. My shoulders weren't rising with breath. My eyes, my reflection's eyes were wrong. They weren't focused on me. They were looking slightly past my left shoulder, toward the space behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing was there. I looked back. The reflection hadn't changed, still staring past me like it hadn't registered my movement. I don't know how long I stood there, probably less than a minute, but my chest felt tight and my fingers started trembling. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" under my breath. The sound seemed to echo, not around me, inside me, like it bounced back from something in the pit of my own head. Then the lights upstairs came on, not the hallway light, my bedroom light. I froze. I hadn't touched the switch, and I was alone. I backed away from the mirror, slowly, step by step, keeping my eyes on it the entire time. My reflection remained motionless. Then, as I reached the living room rug, I saw it move. Not a twitch, not a blink, a full step forward, inside the glass. I dropped the glass I had been holding. It shattered across the floor. The sound jolted me, but it also seemed to break whatever had gripped me. I turned and ran upstairs, not quietly this time. I sprinted. When I reached my room, the light was still on. My phone was on the bed where I left it. I grabbed it, opened the camera, and turned to take a photo of the hallway, just to make sure I wasn't imagining anything. The screen glitched. Not just a blur, but a brief, static pulse. Then it froze on a frame I never took, my face, in the hallway. But not the hallway I stood in. It looked older, dirtier, like the walls were yellowed and the light behind me had gone out. I blinked and the screen returned to normal. I turned the phone off. I sat down on the bed and stared at the door. I didn't move for the next hour. Then I heard a voice. Not loud, not right outside, but inside the walls. It said my name, twice. Then silence. I didn't tell anyone the next morning. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't know how. What would I even say? That my own reflection didn't act right? That I heard a voice in the wall and saw something in the mirror that moved after I walked away? So I stayed quiet. I stayed in my room. My mom knocked around 8 o'clock and asked if I was coming down for breakfast. I told her I felt sick. She accepted that too easily. No questions, no concern in her voice. Just a quick okay, let me know if you need anything. That was it. I stayed in bed until noon, then finally got up. I checked my phone. 2 unread messages from classmates, 1 birthday text from an aunt I hadn't seen in years. Nothing from my sister, who had moved out 2 years earlier. She always texted first thing, but not this time. That detail sat in my gut all day. By 5 o'clock, the memory of the mirror started to feel like a dream, the way weird things always do when enough time passes. But I couldn't shake the sense of dread. I walked down to the dining room again. The mirror was gone, not covered, gone. The wall was bare. I stood in front of it for a long time, half expecting someone to appear in the reflection that wasn't there. When my dad came home from work, he didn't say anything to me. He walked straight into the garage. That was his usual escape. I followed him, not immediately, but after 5 minutes. I found him sitting on the old camping stool, tying fishing lures. I asked if he took the mirror down. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "It cracked during the night. Your mom tossed it. That didn't sit right." The mirror was solid, thick. I'd seen it every year since I was a kid and never once saw a chip or blemish. Now, all of a sudden, it just cracked? On its own? I asked to see the pieces. He didn't even look up from his lures. Trash already went out. That wasn't true. Trash day was Thursday. It was only Monday. I wanted to press him, but I could feel it, the tension, the way his posture stiffened, how he avoided eye contact, the faint tremor in his voice. He was lying. Not just lying, hiding something big. I left the garage and went to my room. That night, the light in my room turned on again. At 2:20 a.m., I hadn't moved. I hadn't touched the switch. I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Then the room lit up. I sat up instantly, heart pounding in my chest. I got out of bed and unplugged the lamp. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not from outside, from inside the room. I turned in a slow circle, scanning everything. Closet open, desk untouched, door still shut. The sound was faint, almost like someone holding their breath in bursts. Then I realized it wasn't coming from the room at all. It was coming from inside my phone. I picked it up, screen black, no open apps. I opened the camera again, turned on the front-facing lens. At first, it just showed me. Hair messed up, pale, tired eyes. But then the frame glitched again. Same hallway, same old wallpaper. This time, I wasn't alone. There was a shape behind me, not a person. A copy. It was me, but not quite. Standing in the back corner with a stiff posture, arms at its sides, and that same off-center stare. Its face didn't blink. Its jaw hung slightly open like it was waiting. I dropped the phone. The screen shattered on impact. That's how hard I'd thrown it. I backed up, sat on the bed again, and tried to breathe. I didn't sleep. Not that night. The next day, I asked my mom why we never had mirrors in the house anymore. Her reaction was subtle, but clear. She froze mid-step, looked at me like I'd just confessed a crime. Then she smiled too quickly. Just superstition. You know how families are. I asked what kind of superstition. She paused again. Some people think reflections trap energy. We don't do mirrors. Simple as that. That wasn't the truth. I knew it. I could see it in the way her fingers clenched at her side, the way her voice lifted unnaturally at the end of each sentence. So I pushed again. What about birthdays? Why is everything different on that day? She stared at me. Not long, just enough to let the silence sit in the air. Some questions, she said, aren't meant to be answered. She walked out after that. I went to my closet and grabbed an old compact mirror I'd hidden years ago. Something I kept in a pencil box from middle school. It still worked. Just a cheap, scratched-up thing from a drugstore, but enough to see a reflection. I sat on the bed, held it up, and stared. My face looked normal. At first. Then I noticed the blink was off. Delayed. Like a split-second lag between my eyes and the one staring back. I moved my left hand. The reflection copied it too fast. Then I smiled. My reflection didn't. I dropped the mirror and it landed face down on the carpet. That night, I called my sister. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was slow, quiet. Hey, I asked why she hadn't texted me on my birthday. She didn't answer right away. I meant to. I forgot. That didn't sound like her. She never forgot things like that. I asked if she still had a mirror in her apartment. She said no, not for years. I asked why. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, because I don't trust what's on the other side. She hung up. I didn't call back. That same night, the compact mirror I had dropped was no longer on the floor when I woke up. I checked under the bed, inside the drawers. Every corner, gone. But something new was there. A line of handprints across the inside of my window, like someone had pressed greasy fingers from the outside. But I live on the second floor, no ladder, no roof access. I left my room and went to the attic. I'd never gone up there alone before, but I had to. Something in me needed answers. The air was stale, dry. Old cardboard boxes lined the beams. I went through them one by one. Most were filled with junk, old toys, winter clothes, photo albums. But then I found a crate with a faded label, for disposal. Inside were shattered mirror shards, wrapped in newspaper. I picked one up carefully. That's when I saw it. Not my reflection, but my sister, in the shard. Her face, staring right at me. Crying, mouth moving, no sound. I dropped the shard. It didn't break again, but it landed on its back. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. I went back downstairs in a daze. I tried calling my sister again. This time it rang 3 times, then a voice answered. But it wasn't hers, it was mine, saying, "Stop looking." The call disconnected. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've seen small changes. My bedroom mirror, one I was sure had been removed years ago, was on the wall last night. Hung perfectly with no nails showing. No memory of anyone putting it there. When I looked into it, my reflection didn't copy me at all. It just watched, like it was waiting for me to slip. I covered it with a sheet, taped every corner. But now, every night, I find the sheet crumpled on the floor. And here's the part I don't like saying out loud. Sometimes, when I wake up, I'm facing the wall, but the bed sheets behind me are pulled down, as if someone had been lying there, right next to me, breathing, watching. The worst part isn't that I feel unsafe. It's that I feel like something's waiting for a moment when I stop questioning it. When I finally forget what I saw that night in the dining room. Or maybe when I stop recognizing which reflection is truly mine. Because I don't think this ends with a broken mirror or a phone call. I think it ends when I let my guard down long enough for whatever this thing is to finally step out. Not from a shadow, but from me.